You're watching Public Affairs. Berkowitz is my name, and politics is our game. And we will be doing lots of politics and public policy today. As we are covering the race, the mayor's race in Chicago, 2019. There are 12 or so candidates. We're focusing on, the top 8 or so, maybe the top 5. As we tape this on August 30th, the Sun-Times headline is, "What is he waiting for?" See that picture of Rahm? What is he waiting for? Rahm needs to decide soon on the third-term bid. Analysis by your friend and mine, Fran Spielman. How's that for a plug? Okay, pretty good. So, look, this race is about Laquan McDonald and violence and murders and homicides and safety and then education, and are the schools performing? Are there rapes going on in the schools by adults, faculty, administrators, adult volunteers of students? Are there sexual things going on by special ed and special ed? And the fiscal issues, should we have a $10 billion pension bond sale? Have we already been beyond that? Is the fiscal issues, is where we have declining enrollment in the last 18 years in CPS by 15%, and we got a, 20% increase in education in the budget for CPS this year? Has the world gone crazy? That's the question. Is Chicago, have I mentioned enough, Paul, to maybe give you something to talk about, to think about? So
it's a lot to cover in 29 minutes.
We have Paul Vallas here. He is, if Rahm runs, which he probably will, most would say Gary McCarthy right now is number 2, Paul number 3, based on polling, but you know, they're pretty close. Gary McCarthy and Paul, and then Lori Lightfoot and Willie Wilson, and on from there. So you're seeing a guy, Paul Vallas, who was Mr. Education around the turn of the 21st century. Would that be the case? When you ran for governor.
Sound old.
Yeah, but well, Paul once told me, I said, you should run. I was talking about some other office after that, and I said, you're a young guy. He said, Jeff, it's not the age, it's the mileage. And now you've had more mileage.
A lot of mileage.
And now you're running. I think you've gotten your second wind. It's like you run, and sometimes you run a mile or two and you're feeling tired, and all of a sudden after 2.5 miles, you feel like you could run forever, right?
Well, my whole life has been public service, and the city's in trouble, and that's why I'm making a run of it. As you know, every single public service job I've had, it's been by invitation. And I mean, when I was invited to Philadelphia after the state took over the schools, they're on the verge of financial collapse. I stabilized those districts, tripled math scores, double reading scores in a period of, actually over an extended period of 8 to 9 years. In New Orleans, after Katrina, the Landrews, Senator Landrew, Mitch Landrew, the former mayor, Governor Blanco asked me to come down and rebuild the New Orleans schools after Hurricane Katrina, and of course, after the devastating earthquake in Haiti, and then later, after the earthquake in Chile, I was asked by the international community to go there. So my approach has always been to go where I am needed, and this is the city that I was born and raised in, south side of Chicago, attended 3 public schools, the city of my immigrant grandparents.
What is your occupation? How would you describe it?
I'm a public servant. I am a public servant, and as a public servant, I would characterize my approach to public service as being a problem solver and not a politician. I'm the type of person who has always taken on large institutions in crisis, and I like to think I've always been able to address their underlying financial issues while restructuring those institutions so that they could improve upon their mission, whether it was the city as budget director, public safety, infrastructure, schools, improved academic performance.
So you're a crisis manager, would you say that? I think you once said that to me.
Well, I have done...
You manage crises?
I have done crisis management, but, overall, I have always been what I consider to be a very effective public manager. And obviously I have experience in public management in dealing with institutions in crises. Okay. But by the end of our first year, Chicago public schools were no longer in crises, and we were.
Your first year, when you were made by Mayor Richard M. Daley in 1995, the superintendent of the CPS, also known as the CEO.
Right.
And you were there for 6 years.
Chicago Public Schools.
95 to 2001.
Right.
And for people who don't know, the Illinois legislature in 95, and it was controlled by the Republicans then,
Right.
said we're going to give a lot of control to the mayor in Chicago to control the schools. It was thought at that time nobody was in control. The accountability was very
Right.
diffuse. Did I get that right?
Yes.
And you were there as Mr. Inside, and was it Gary Chico, who as head of the board, was Mr. Outside?
Well,
We're wandering down memory
Right.
lane here.
well, I was the city's budget director, and I had spent...
Before that, right.
Right, and I had spent 3 years not only straightening out the city's finances, balancing the budget, putting almost 14,000 police officers on the street, and...
You put 14,000, that was like in 93,
That's
94?
1993, 94, 95. That also included...
14,000.
14,000 in a total strength on the police force and in the schools, because at the time there was a school patrol. But I had also negotiated the collective bargaining agreement, so the city had labor,
Okay.
peace, and strong finances, and the mayor wanted me to bring those same skills to the
Okay,
schools.
now I want to get to the current, which is right now.
Right.
So we'll come back to education, but on violence, last year in 2017, I think roughly 650 homicides in Chicago,
Right.
which is more than New York
And
and
LA.
LA combined.
That's correct.
Both of those were less than 300. Way more population in New York, more population in LA.
That's right.
So, and the absolute number of homicides, not per capita, in Chicago was more. It was, and that was 2017, it was 650. In 2016, it surged up to 762. So is that a crisis? We don't want to have, if you could avoid any homicides, but is the level of, is the level of homicides in Chicago right now, as exhibited in 2016, 2017, and the shootings, is that a crisis?
Well, I think it is. Obviously, the violence has a much greater impact on certain communities, but at the end of the day, anytime you're a city that has more murders than LA and New York combined, and one could argue that
Anytime,
there's a
what's the
crisis.
word to describe that? It's a crisis.
One would call that a crisis. And my approach is, you're only as safe as your least safe neighborhood. And you have to understand what's happening with crime, too, as it's spreading throughout the city. You've seen a significant increase in violent crimes, carjacking, et cetera. So
Throughout the city.
that's right. So
But
the
the
failure,
great majority of homicides and shootings are on the south and west side.
Yes.
Would that be correct?
yes, that
Okay.
is correct. But let me
The
point
great
out,
majority.
there's been a significant increase in crime on the CTA, significant increase in violent crime in other areas of the city in terms of burglaries and carjackings, et cetera.
Is there a short-run solution and a long-run solution?
Well, I think you have to do
Or
two.
is there only one solution?
All right, so let me explain.
Yes,
I
sir.
think you have to do two things. First of all, you've got to get at the underlying causes of crime. Generational poverty. There are some areas on the south and west side that have been in a depression state for decades. The city's lost 70% of its value based on residential values. And yet we see cranes going up all over the place, downtown, et cetera. So where could the loss in value and wealth be? It's on the west side and the south side. It's in the poorest communities where you see no retail, where you see gutted out houses, where you see very few occupied storefronts, where you see vacant lots. I mean, at the end of the day, there are communities that have lost 30, 40% of their assessed value because they're in depression states.
One question.
You have certain communities, very important, you have certain communities
Okay.
in the city, the Rosen-Pullman area, where 50, 60% of the men are in some phase of the criminal justice system. So the failure to...
So you've outlined the problem. Let me just interrupt to say,
Yeah.
Rahm Emanuel has been mayor of Chicago for 7 years. He was elected in 2011, re-elected in 2015.
Yeah.
Is there a plan now to deal with these issues you've been outlining, the violence, the surge in homicides and shootings? And has there ever been a plan?
No,
Two questions. Has there ever been a plan, and is there a plan now by Rahm Emanuel to deal with this?
Well, let me just say that...
Because you are running against Rahm Emanuel,
Yeah.
aren't you?
Yes, but he needs two plans. One is he needs a plan to develop those areas that have been long neglected, those areas where there is high crime, those areas where you can improve, if you can improve the situation, where you can offer people economic opportunities, where you can have an economic development policy that is not creating a tale of two cities. We have
That's an economic plan.
Number one.
Does he have an economic plan?
No,
Okay.
no, not for those communities. He hasn't.
And
He
we'll
hasn't
come
had
back
one.
to this, but you have a plan?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to that.
Right. And
Let's
then this-
get the big picture here.
and then
He
this-
doesn't have a plan on the economic side, you do.
And-
Does he have a plan
On the police
on the
side.
police
The
side?
answer is no.
Do you have a plan?
Yes.
Okay. Are there any other things that I've missed, that Rom, if he is performing well, that he should have a plan? He needs one on economic development, you say he doesn't have one. He
Right.
needs one on police and violence, specifically, he doesn't have one. Any other plans that are key for right
Well,
now?
let's focus
Those two.
on those two right now.
Okay, so let's start though, we'll come back, we may have to do another show on economic development.
So let's
Is
focus
Today,
on-
we want to
on
make sure we
cops.
cover violence, education, and fiscal issues. So yeah, cops. What is your plan, Paul, to deal with the extraordinarily high number of homicides and shootings?
Well, let me just preface my remarks by saying that you've got to deal with the long-term issue of poverty and lack of economic opportunity, and as you said, or as you suggested, we'll have an opportunity to talk about that in detail. And if people go to my website, they'll see what I've laid out on how I'm going to focus
VallasForAllChicago.com.
allchicago.com.
You can follow Paul on Twitter at Paul Vallas. You can find him in Facebook and Vallas for All Chicago, Instagram Vallas for All Chicago.
And the website.
And the website, again, is VallasForAllChicago.com.
So let me talk about cops for a second.
Do it in a minute, and then we'll take another minute. We
Yeah.
want to do this in chunks. Tell us,
All right, well, let me-
when you say, I want to get it like,
Let me
you do something in the next
Right.
6 months, the next year. If you're elected, do we have to wait 20 years
No,
to
no.
solve this, or do
So
we
let
start
me-
solving it in the first year?
So give me 2 minutes to explain why
Compromise, 90 seconds.
why there is no plan, and then give me a couple minutes to tell you what the plan is. First of all, the mayor has no plan. He allowed close to 2,000 police positions not to be filled, positions that were at one time filled, so they significantly shrunk the size of the police department. In the process, they decimated the detectives division. There used to be 1,200 detectives. And then they fell to a number of less than 700. And like 3%, 4% of the police force. New York, 15% of their police officers are detectives. They also shrunk the number of sergeants. They also dismantled what I would call the support teams, those flexible teams that they could dispatch to high crime areas. And they developed this violence reduction initiative, which is in effect moving police officers around from one section of the city to another to deal with whatever hotspot.
That was a very short-run thing. We're taping this on
That's
August
right.
30th. A few weekends ago, there was a surge in weekend violence, 12 fatalities, 74 shootings. So the mayor in 4 of the 22 districts moved 600 people from elsewhere into those 4 districts. But that's a short-run thing.
No, but let me say it. The
That's not
violence.
like- that's not
No,
like
no.
a
The
total
violence
solution.
reduction
To be fair,
initiative.
to be fair.
No, the violence reduction initiative has been their strategy. So they don't have enough cops, so they move them around, and they're paying a
So
fortune
you're
in
saying they've
overtime.
doing this, what I just described,
been
you're saying
doing it.
they've been doing that in general,
Yes.
not just that weekend.
Yeah, they've been doing that in
Just
general.
pop these cops, push them here, next week something happens, push them
And
there.
also, let me tell you
Okay.
what happens.
Glad
Not
you
only-
clarified
This is
that.
really important. Not only are they shorthanded, but not only have they decimated the supervisory ranks, which creates accountability issues. I don't even want to get into the lack of training and the lack
We
of
don't have time.
preparation.
We'll come back.
Okay, but the bottom line here is the cost in overtime is absolutely enormous. When you compare the amount they're paying in overtime today, I'm talking about current dollars, with what they paid in overtime when I was budget director and we had many more police on the street. On the average, they're paying about $100 million more.
Okay, so you want to get more cops, lower the overtime costs,
All right, so let me explain.
and if you have more cops, you have lower overtime.
Right, so let me explain what my approach would be, both long-term, short-term.
Just one thing, so roughly now we have how many police?
Oh, I don't know.
Ballpark.
Well, he's budgeted for 13,600.
Actually, how many do we
but
have
he's
on the
way
street
short.
now?
I can't tell you the exact
I
number.
hear 11,500, does that sound right?
I think it may be a little more than that.
12,000 possibly?
Yeah, they have begun to
Okay.
restore the detective ranks, but let me tell you the problem
Okay.
with detectives is the detective ranks, now the new detectives that are coming in, don't nearly have the experience that the detectives had who left.
Okay.
So they're clearly in crisis.
We're going to run
And-
out of time, so
Okay,
just,
okay,
here's what I want to do, if I may.
yes.
I think you've given people a good start on your plan. They can find out more on the website.
They can.
But I want to ask you, because some of these things, like way into the future,
So let me
So-
tell you a couple of things that I would do right away.
in a minute.
Okay.
Minute.
Yeah,
In a minute.
okay. All right, very quickly, besides obviously accelerating the hiring process, but making sure that people are trained, because they've been running two training shifts in the police academy, because they're losing officers as fast as they're replacing them. But what I have called for is two things. One is that they significantly expand the detectives division by inviting back retired police officers with the investigatory experience, like many other cities are
Okay.
doing. Many other cities are
Keep
doing
going,
that.
keep going. What else?
And
got
what
that.
that would do is that would allow you to bring back 400, 500, 600 officers who could work
Okay.
on investigation issues, because you're only clearing about 5% of the shootings and 17% of murders. The second thing that I would do.
Clearing means you're only prosecuting. You're not even convicting those people.
That's right.
You're only prosecuting 17% of the homicides. The other guys don't even get prosecuted.
Yeah,
we don't even know if the 17%
Yeah,
get convicted.
We're
Okay,
not
just want to
talking,
clarify that.
but we're not talking about the Attorney General not prosecuting these cases. We're talking about cases that are, in effect, prepared and then sent. So when they say clearing, those are cases that are then prepared to be sent or to
the state's attorney to be prosecuted.
et cetera.
Okay.
So the issue of whether or not the state's attorney is being
Let me
aggressive
just-
enough, et cetera, is not part of
let
it.
me-
But let me tell you the second thing, very quick.
30 seconds.
The second thing is, I've also talked about the need to create a witness protection program. Because the detectives tell me there's no way for them to not only protect witnesses, but to protect victims. So, and we're not talking about moving people to a suburb of Phoenix, Arizona.
Provide a policeman, provide somebody so that if somebody sees them, they don't go shoot the person because there's a policeman nearby.
No.
What are you talking about?
Sometimes it's about relocating them where they can live with other family members. Sometimes it's as simple.
Relocating within Chicago, you're saying?
Yes, sometimes
Okay.
within Chicago. Sometimes it's as simple as moving them to another CHA complex with a housing voucher. Sometimes it's that
Where not everybody
simple.
knows where they are, is what you're saying.
That's right. Sometimes
Okay.
it's that simple.
Let me just throw out something. It supplements perhaps your plan. I want to get an idea
Sure.
of what you think of it. So Gary McDougall has written about this general topic. I won't go into, he's somebody, former CEO.
Right.
He was involved in moving people off of welfare into jobs in the Edgar administration. So he may know something about this.
Okay?
And it's in the Wall Street Journal, August 9th, 2018. But one thing he says, and other people have said this, there are several lists that are highly important. I think Eddie Johnson, the superintendent of police, has said there are about 1,800 people, list of 1,800, who will be 90% of those, 90% of the shooters or the victims are on that list of 1,800. And then there are other people who say there's a list of 3,000, and a lot of these are the young gang members, so forth. Gary doesn't say, this is a list, go target and go after these people. No, he says, these people are people you can go from the bad guys to good guys. He says, mentor them. Many of these people he contends, if you offered them a $15 an hour job, they would take it. They don't want to be a street entrepreneur selling drugs. They don't want to risk their lives. So if you were to target, would you agree with him? If you found a way where you could put the resources into mentoring these people, we have that in the city, state. That's the other thing he says. We have people to work with these people on the city level, state, federal, but they're all silos. They don't talk with each other. So that's the proposal. What do you think of it?
If you allow me to finish my comments.
Yes, sir.
If you look at my economic development plan, I focus on 5 issues, and the 5th issue I focus on is something that emerged from my discussion with people like Gary in the community, and that was to, in effect, go in and to identify and work with those community-based organizations to provide community-based social service support and also community-based economic opportunities like job training, neighborhood-based job training,
Right.
and try to connect people to jobs, try to identify those individuals, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and try to get them into the type of adult ed and occupational training programs so you can get them off the street and you can get them engaged and you can make them a part of society.
So you agree,
So I
you're
speak
saying it's
to
a
that
part of your
concept.
plan.
That's right.
You are in agreement. Now you and others need to figure out how to execute this. So if you become mayor, you can hit the ground running.
But let me respond,
right?
but it's not difficult to execute.
It's not difficult?
It's
Okay.
not. The
Why
problem is
doesn't
the
Rome do
mayor
it?
simply is
what's Rome
prioritizing.
do
Let
with
me
them?
give you a case in point.
Yes, sir.
Right now, the mayor waited till 2016 to impose developer fees on these big developments that you see downtown, et cetera. And he created this fund, and he's allocating money to community, to the west side and the south side. It's election year. Amazing what happens in the election year. Magic happens. We should have elections every year. We'll get responsive
There's
government.
a lot of activity in election
but,
years, right?
So much of that money could actually go to fund these type of community-based initiatives.
Right.
Let me give
So
you
the money
another-
is there.
That's
You have to
right.
redeploy it and redirect it
That's
and
right.
reprioritize,
No,
right?
he's giving it to somebody out here so that they can replace their storm windows in their condo association.
Right, so you need to focus it on the things
That's
you and I
right.
are
He's
talking
simply
about.
not prioritizing, because when was the last time he was actually in those
Okay.
communities? He's not getting a sense of the community.
So one thing, just on the other thing too, and you touched on this, but I got to give you a minute on this.
No, you're right.
The police morale, we're told, is awful. The community doesn't trust the police. As you said, you need a witness program, but they won't even come forward to tell you who might have done
Well,
this.
if you're not,
So you have to figure out, as McDougal said, and I wondered if you've gone, the mayor does have these meetings between the police and the community representatives, but McDougal says it's an hour, the community representative speaks, the policeman might say something, but they don't really communicate and discuss, and nothing's happening. Have you gone to any of these meetings,
Yeah.
and what would you do if you were the mayor to make them better?
well, the answer is yes. The meetings aren't going to make them better. Let me tell you what's going to connect the police to the community. Very important here. First of all, you need beat integrity. And when you have a program that basically moves the police all over the city, you don't get that beat integrity. So you have too many situations where you have police officers in communities they're not familiar with, and communities not familiar with their police officers. So it creates dangerous situations. That's number one.
Okay.
Number two, you need to create a process by which the next generation of police officers can actually be recruited from the community. And I've recommended very specifically that, when I was in Chicago Public Schools, we opened a series of military high schools, and we have, follow me on this, we have 46,000 students in, 46 military ROTC programs, 11,000 ROTC cadets. The next generation of police officers and first responders could be drawn from those programs, could be drawn from the community. So you need beat integrity, so you have officers who know the community and officers who are working that community, and when they work overtime, they're working overtime in the community. And the second thing that you do is you need to create a pipeline so that people from the community, free people from those community high schools, can become police officers in their own right.
To be continued. We've got about 7 minutes left. We've
Okay.
got to go over to education. I'll ask you 3 or 4 questions. You'll get 2 minutes to respond, okay?
Okay.
I'll group them. When you were there, since and currently, a lot of people think only about 30% of the students in CPS, of the minority students especially, black students, Hispanic students, read at grade level, 70% don't. I want to get your comment. Is that number right? And if it is, what would you do? As the mayor, who would you put there as the head of your schools to change that? Number 2, the Chicago Tribune has had an expose in June that for the last 10 years, an average of every other week, there's a credible complaint of an adult, of a faculty administrator, a volunteer, raping, sexual assault, sexual harassment of the CPS students. There's a problem with special ed not being monitored. Special ed kids who are violent are hurting special ed kids who are vulnerable. So you got that problem.
You're giving me a very short window to
I know.
respond to these things.
Okay, and then there's a fiscal mess. Over the last 18 years, enrollment has gone down
Right.
435,000 to 370,000. And this year, we're pushing the budget up 20%, counting operating and capital costs, solve some of those or address some of those things.
In what, 60 seconds or
minutes.
2 minutes? No,
Yeah.
let me respond by saying, when I ran the Chicago Public Schools, we not only made sure that all the schools had strong curriculum instructional programs, but any child who was underperforming received up to 2 hours of additional
I remember
instructional
that.
time. We had the largest after-school programs in the country. Also, we had school open for
Is that
6.
statistic right, the
for
30% number? Is that right, and what would you do about it?
I don't know what the actual
What's your best guess?
statistic. I think the point that I want to make is that every year every year, schools improved under our watch. And when I took those same reforms to Philadelphia, we tripled the math scores and we doubled the reading scores, and we actually got the percentages above 50% in many of the categories. So my point is, I think you could design an academic program that, in effect, provides the critical supports that students need to
A minute on the rapes, and it's covered up. It didn't come out until the Tribune. This has been going on for 7 years under Rahm, for 3 years before. A minute on what went wrong. What could you have done as mayor so that didn't happen?
Well, let me tell you what we did when we were at the Chicago Public Schools. We had 24-hour, 24/7 reporting. We had this Office of School and Community Relations, which had direct contact with individual schools and individual school councils. So if there were issues, they could
They would have learned of that and would have gone up the ladder and something would have been done.
We also had,
but that's not present now.
No. Those programs were done away with. We also had the Office of Crisis Intervention that was connected to DCFS. So when we received information, and we pulled many teachers, many administrators out of the schools for a variety of offenses, and even if we couldn't get rid of them, we would pull them out of the schools, and we would, we used to call it Camp Beverly. So the important thing was to get them out of the schools and to ensure that the schools were safe and secure. The final thing I want to mention is there seemed to be an absence of protocols, a lack of training on how to report these incidents, a lack of an entity to report those instances too, and they were
So Janice Jackson says they're doing all that now.
And they were
It took 7 years to figure that out.
It's election year, and
right?
they're doing a lot of things. You know, this mayor always seems to be responding to a crisis.
We only have a few minutes,
Okay.
but this is a really key point. We'll keep it to a minute.
Okay, you really need an hour show.
I know. We'll get you back for another half hour.
Okay.
Promise? Okay.
Absolutely.
It's a really
always.
key point. One thing the mayor says, and he may be right on this, there's a lot of choice in CPS now. He has a lot of magnet schools that are really high performers. He has selective enrollment schools. They may be the same thing as magnet schools.
Excellent.
You know, like Jones College Prep, which is right down the street from your campaign
Yeah, I
headquarters.
built all those schools.
That is a selective enrollment
Yeah,
school.
yeah.
It's not a charter school.
Right.
It is a high performer,
All
right?
right, so let me,
Okay, there are probably 10 or 15, which we won't rattle off of those. There are charter schools that are high performers. There's a great diversity here. There are a number of schools that are performing, and you get somebody like Lori Lightfoot who says, one of your competitors, we need a moratorium on charter schools. Paul, are a lot of the charter schools doing well? Maybe even more, maybe even the great majority are. Are the magnet schools doing well? Are selective enrollment should we build on that, or should we start diminishing those things that are doing well?
You're spending more time on your questions than you're giving me on my answers. So
You
let me
got
respond.
the rest of the show to
So let
answer.
me respond by, my approach was to expand choice, and I did it not only by opening all the magnet schools that you questioned, Northside College Prep, Peyton, Gwendolyn Brooks, and I put magnet schools in every single community, just not like on the north
And you
side.
started charter schools.
And we opened 15 charter schools.
Do you still believe in those things?
Well, I don't think you should
In
open.
2018,
I don't believe you should open an excessive number of schools, because what they did.
would you open any if you became mayor? Would you open any charter school, new charter schools?
No, well, what I would do is to have performing charters take over for failing charters. I think we have
You'd expand the performing charters.
I would expand the performing charters.
Give them the right to have more students come in, those performing charters.
Yeah, what I would do with those performing
Did I get that right?
No, let me explain.
What do you
Let me
mean by
explain.
expand? Yeah.
What I'm saying is, I don't think we need any more charter schools. I think
Do we need more opportunities for students who are not at those charters
you-
but want to go there?
can you let me respond?
Yeah, that's the question.
All right, yeah, but what I'm saying is, the district has lost 70,000 students. You have got schools, charters included, that are at 30, 40%, 50% capacity. So
Do
the
you
bottom,
really?
so the bottom
Do you
line
really?
is, so the
Okay.
bottom line is you have schools that are bleeding enrollment. I don't think you need to be opening any more schools. What I'm saying is, if you have a high-performing charter and you have a failing charter, let that high-performing charter take over, or bring their model to the weak-performing charter.
So those students who are in a school that's not working get in a school or campus that is working.
That's right. Because
Did I
in
get
New-
that right?
Because,
Okay.
yeah, because in New Orleans, let me give you an example. The
You
high,
only got about 30 seconds
all right, very
left, but you
quickly.
got it.
In New
Okay.
Orleans, the high-performing charters take over, replace the low-performing charters. But my approach was to put magnet-type programs, high achievement programs, in all the neighborhood schools to make them attractive. That's why I put 15 International Baccalaureate Academies in 15 neighborhood schools. So the idea was just not to open select enrollment magnet schools. The idea was to magnetize the neighborhood schools. That's the type of strategy that makes neighborhood schools more attractive.
Okay, the short of it is we'll come back with Paul. You'll do another show soon.
Always.
We got to cover the fiscal